Well, with the rising cost of living, it can be challenging to get the groceries that you need for the right price. Challenging may be a bit of an understatement. Sometimes group buying can offer some relief to your pocketbook. With that in mind, some neighbors in the city have decided to group buy and split the cost. And now there's an app to help the condo dwellers do it fairly. The chief neighbor of Naborino, Dan Flatt, joins me in studio to talk about the app that will allow others to build a community in their apartments and condos. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. I hope I got the pronunciation of that right. It's pronounced Naborino?
Absolutely. You got it.
Where did you get the idea to start this group buying app with or group buying itself with your neighbors?
Yeah, we actually, my wife and I started a Facebook group in the condo building where we've lived for about 8 years. Shortly after we moved in, we just felt like it would be a good idea to have a place where we could just casually get to know the neighbors, reduce some of the friction of having to knock on people's doors to introduce ourselves. And over the years, the community just grew on that platform, and it just really became the place that everybody went to talk about anything that had to do in the building. And then in the early days of the COVID pandemic, it became a bit of a lifeline. All of a sudden, we were all told, stay at home. We could hear our neighbors on the other side of the walls and ceiling. But the fact that we actually had a place to talk, we were able to help each other, talk about mask protocol, things like that.
Right. I love this because the idea of group buying, I mean, is definitely not new, right? I actually remember being a kid and my parents connecting with people in the neighborhood I remember one point in time, neighbors got together to purchase a whole animal that was butchered for the neighborhood to split and to use for food. That had happened both in Nigeria and in Canada. But in both of those cases, it was a situation where there is a neighborhood, there's a community, and then they do this together in order to save some money. But this seems very much like, well, using the group buying and then having the community built off of that.
Absolutely. We see it as two forces that kind of feed each other. There's a bit of a flywheel. The more the community comes together, the more open they're going to be to buying together. There's even a little bit of FOMO if you need a minimum number of people to get the discount on a group buying offer in our marketplace, and you know that your neighbor has a dog, you have a dog, and there's an offer on something for dogs, you're going to send them a message and say, hey, you should join this deal. Meanwhile, as people are buying, we have a structure where a community leader actually receives all the deliveries and does the last door delivery. And so that person they have so many opportunities for in-person interactions. And from there, we really just want to build on that foundation of community in a environment where just in a lot of urban high-rise buildings, the culture just isn't really there for people to just get to know each other. There's a lot of friction. And so we're trying to reduce that by giving people an easy entry point into interactions.
And you're building a team to compete against the retail system. This is quite the action here. So what services and shopping have you been able to save on with this?
Yeah, so we've been running tests for a while. In my building, we actually started with weekly Costco trips. So just put some of the most popular items on, took requests, started with a Shopify store. And we called it Costco prices, condo sizes, and another thing in a lot of apartment and condo buildings, you don't have a lot of storage space for these big bulk purchases. So being able to split, a pack of 48 rolls of toilet paper into 4 portions of 12 made a lot of sense for a lot of people, and so that became popular. Then we started to just interact with direct-to-consumer CPG companies. A lot of companies that are maybe selling to one customer at a time through their website, if they can sell to 5 people, 10 people, increase their order size, it becomes a really good middle path for them between direct-to-consumer and wholesale.
Okay, so how does this app work?
Okay, so when you first register, the first person in a building to register, we do a little bit more verification just to make sure that they actually live in the building. Once they're signed up and verified, they can start inviting their neighbors. Right now, we are, we definitely are hoping that we can get some partners in building management condo boards, but it's not a requirement in order to sign up. Once you're signed up and your neighbors start joining you on the app, you can actually go into a sort of a social news feed modeled after a Facebook group that we call the lobby, where people can just share events, news, really trying to actually restrict the types of messages, because we've seen in the Facebook group it requires a lot of moderation to make sure that things don't get out of hand. So we want to make sure that it is more practical, people being able to help each other, inform each other, and really geared towards building community. Then we have the marketplace. And so in the marketplace, people will see every week a group of deals that will expire at the end of that week. They have a minimum number of people who need to join before a discount unlocks.
Okay. Now, you mentioned Facebook there. Why the move away from Facebook to an actual separate app?
So, we don't actually see ourselves as trying to replace Facebook groups. Like, we've gotten a lot of great ideas from it, but a lot of buildings, as part of our research, I started reaching out to the admins of a lot of other Facebook groups for buildings, and there's many across the city. Nobody's told the people who started those, hey, you should start a group for Facebook. There wasn't really a template, and it's a very manual process of verifying that people live in your building. Yeah. So we actually see that for the buildings that have a Facebook group, this becomes an additional tool, and for the ones that don't, we may become their primary way of communicating.
What about those who aren't in a building? I mean, will this be available for people who live in independent homes as well?
Eventually, yes. So we're starting with the use case of condo and apartment buildings, particularly just because we think there's a lot of economies of scale on the delivery side. It's also just more difficult, despite the fact that you're living on top of each other literally. Community just doesn't naturally form in urban apartment and condo buildings the way it does on some streets, particularly in small towns. I think a lot of people from other cultures come to a city like Toronto, and it's a culture shock that you just don't know the names of your neighbors.
Yeah. It's actually funny you should mention like that. Cousins of mine in Nigeria will say, well, you don't know everybody who lives like in your apartment building? I'd say no. But part of that comes from, you mentioned the difficulty when living in a building like that. A lot of that meeting of the neighbors happens when you're spending time in your yard or you're coming in or out of your home, right? So logistically, it wouldn't be as easy inside of a building. This all sounds wonderful. I'm just curious as to what the incentive is for sellers and for you.
Yeah, well, so our business model, we call ourselves a market network, which is a hybrid of a social network and a marketplace. So majority of social networks that we're familiar with, they have an advertising model. They're selling a lot of customer data. Our model is actually based on the e-commerce side of things. So when vendors create a deal with us, they'll set up a product, say, here's the regular price, here's the discounted price, here's the minimum number of people who need to join. We collect the money from the users in our buildings, who we call Naiborinos, and then we take a commission on every sale before we pay out the vendor. But we'll eventually switch over to a monthly subscription model for the vendors.
It's great to meet you, Dan. Thanks for telling us all about this.
Thank you very much.
Dan Flatt is the chief neighbor at Naborino.